Behind those cozy nights at home, thousands of employees at BP go to work every day. People producing more U.S. natural gas. People building grid-scale solar capacity. People turning landfill waste gas into pipeline-quality renewable natural gas. And people delivering all of that power where it's needed. They're part of the more than 300,000 jobs BP supports across the country. Learn more at bp.com/investing in America.
Hello, and welcome back to Peak Northwest, an outdoors and travel podcast by the Oregonian and Oregon Live, dedicated to the adventure and exploration of our beautiful Pacific Northwest. I'm your host, Vickie Connor, and on this podcast, we take you to some of the most beautiful and interesting destinations in our region, discussing where to go, what to do, and places to see. And today we are swimming, we are biking, and we are running a total of 70.3 miles, recapping my recent half Ironman triathlon. And joining me on the podcast once more is engagement editor Julie Evenson. Julie, welcome back on the pod.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so last time you were on the podcast, we were talking about Hood to Coast, one of our greatest running events here in the region. And obviously, you are a runner, Julie, and you have been for a while. Do you know much about triathlons, where running is 1/3 of what you do?
I have some friends who are, runners who do triathlons. It's something that I think a lot of people who get into running, especially running distance, like to do. But I've personally never done one. And so I don't know a ton about like the technical details and how it works. So I would love to hear about that experience from you. So you mentioned that you completed the Ironman, but all triathlons are not Ironmans, correct?
Correct. And I will say that, yes, it was under the Ironman umbrella, but it was a half Ironman. And I think a lot of people, when I tell them Ironman, they think about the full distance. So with triathlons, there are many different distances that you can do. So you can do a super sprint triathlon, or then there's the sprint triathlon, which is some of the shortest distances you can do, where you're swimming either 750 meters or yards or closer to 800, and then you bike somewhere around like 10 miles, and then you run a 5K. Those are some of the shorter distances. And depending on the race, the distances might slightly vary a little bit. And then you could step it up to an Olympic triathlon, which, given the name, this is something they do in the Olympics. And that distance is a little bit more. So it's 1,500 meter swim, and then a 20-mile bike, and a 10K run afterwards. So the half Ironman distance, as I mentioned earlier, is a total of 70.3 miles. And you swim 1.2 miles, then you bike 56 miles, and then you finish off with a half marathon. And this is all back-to-back activities. So right after the swim, you jump on your bike, and right after you finish the bike, you take off into that run.
So that sounds pretty intense.
Yes.
And that's the half. So what's the total mileage on the full?
The full is double that.
Double that. So exactly double that.
Exactly double that, which I cannot even fathom after completing this race, the way my legs were feeling. I cannot imagine what training goes into that. But yeah, this was 70.3 miles. There are, Ironman puts on hundreds of races every year all over the globe. And so this race actually happened in Richland, Washington, or kind of the Tri-Cities area. If you aren't familiar with the area, it's about a 3.5 hour drive from Portland. You go east along 84 into a more like deserty area. So Richland, Washington hosts this race. This is the first year that they had it there. Previously, they hosted it in Maple Valley, Washington. And then also Salem hosts one here in Oregon that happens in July every year. And that one is so popular. Apparently, it's a really great beginner race. And I wanted to do that one, but it sold out too quickly. So I did this Tri-Cities race. And it was actually really lovely. I loved that area, and I hadn't been out there before. So that was kind of cool, being able to travel somewhere and experience a new landscape while racing as well.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. So I went to college in Eastern Washington. And so I love that part of the Pacific Northwest and I love running. You're up a little higher. That's a little higher elevation. If you keep going east from there, it's even higher. But it's gorgeous. So what was that? What was that like? It had to be different than your training experience.
It got hot. That is for
Yes.
sure. Because, the run is the last component. And even though you're starting anywhere between 6:30 and 7:30, that run for me was around a little bit before 1 p.m. Um, so it got pretty hot and it was very unshaded. But other than that, I loved the landscape, and it was really beautiful. It took you, especially the bike ride itself, took you through some vineyards. So that was a really cool landscape to just bike through, seeing all these different farms. So you bike through a little bit of neighborhoods, and then you get out to the farmland, and it felt just really expansive, and some cool scenery to make your way through.
Nice. So 70.3 miles. Obviously, that's not something that you can just like get up off your couch and do. Like, some people can do that maybe for a 5K or a 10K. I'm going to guess that that is not a good idea to do for an event this intense. So, what was your training like? First of all, when did you start training? And then how do you train for something like this?
So the training for me, since I had no triathlon experience before, like I could vaguely run a lot shorter distances than a half marathon. I had a bike and I biked around for fun. And then I knew how to tread water, but I had no idea how to freestyle swim. And so swimming is something that I prioritize. So I started quote unquote training in November. So, roughly a 10-month training period. Was I going super hard that whole time, or like even really committed to a plan that whole time? No. But I was pretty committed to the swimming aspect right from the start. I was taking swim lessons through a swim instructor here in Portland who offers these group adult swim lessons. And I basically emailed her and I was like, am I even able to come and start here with these lessons at this very, novice level of swimming? And she was great. She was super welcoming, and helped me go from not being able to breathe properly, just swimming across the pool 25 yards, to being able to swim that 1.2 miles in open water. So there is a lot of training that goes into this, especially, if you're like me and you don't have a ton of experience in each medium that you're doing here in this try. So, for me, training, I looked at a few different online training plans and guides, and tried to follow them somewhat loosely. And one thing that is really helpful, especially for the bike component, is that, you know, when people think about biking or training for biking, you might think, okay, I have to do these long rides. I don't really want to bike by myself out, going 50 miles or whatever. So, what I did is I bought a bike trainer, and that's something that's common in the triathlon world, which essentially allows you to bike indoors and I have something called Zwift that you can set up basically like a computer game, and it trains you to go up hills or long distances. And then you can turn on a movie in the background and continue to train. I joined a lot of running groups as well. I think overall, my training was made so much easier by, finding different communities and groups to do the swimming, the biking, and the running with. And not training alone. That was the biggest thing. Finding communities within each and then having people to go and do these long training days with and making friendships out of it. I know it sounds so cliche, but it's like the reward wasn't the medal at the end of this race, but the friendships you made along the way.
Oh, no, that's true though. Obviously I've never done a triathlon, but marathon training, those 18, 20-mile runs are really lonely and long when you do them by yourself. So I can only imagine if you're training for a, 50 plus mile bike ride, that's got to be the same kind of energy.
Yes. Yeah. And one of my closest friends that I made through my swim group, who also, started from scratch with her swimming as well, she signed up for the same race in Washington. And so she was my buddy because she would go on those long bike rides with me. And there's only so much you can really talk about with your friends and
Mhm.
family about races and like getting into the nitty gritty about nutrition and all that stuff before people like you have maybe 5 minutes before people are really their attention is lost in that. So it's nice to have someone to just bounce ideas off of and talk about all the intricacies of the race and not completely bore the other person.
So you mentioned nutrition, and that is something that I'm wondering about because, my experience is mostly running, but when you are training for longer distance runs, you're routinely burning 1,000, 2,000 calories in a single session. And when you're doing this kind of cross functional training where you're doing multiple things, and swimming is a huge calorie burn, how do you approach that when you're training? And then what does your fueling look like when you're actually doing the race?
This was something that was so new to me. And, previously when I would go for a run, it's like, okay, I'm just going for a little short run, maybe a 5K, and I don't need to bring anything with me. And then slowly through all my research about triathlons, I realized, oh, you are just constantly fueling, or else you're going to quote unquote bonk and just like not be able to
Yep.
go on. Your body's going to give up on you. And so that was almost like a science of trying different fuel and nutrition throughout that 10-month period is like, okay, what sits well in my stomach, gives me the right energy. And so I was trying different brands. I'm not sure if you're familiar with like the Feed website, but that's a great place where you can order a bunch of different stuff and they have discounts and everything. And you just kind of try stuff that, maybe you've heard works for other people, maybe it'll work for you. And yeah, it's a lot of getting used to eating a lot of either gels or gummies or having mixes in your water to continue to fuel you throughout the race. So I think, yeah, a lot of the training was okay, these gummies have worked for me. Let me continue to use them. And what's crazy is that in the race itself, you're eating the most on the bike because you have access to food. I had a little satchel type of thing on my bike and that had a bunch of gummies and gels and stuff. And so it just feels like you're having a buffet on the bike, continually eating and stuff. And it's essential because even, in this race, I'm sure these people prepped a lot. And, if you're going by the old rule of not trying anything new on race day, hopefully your plan is foolproof and you've got it down. But then you'll see people really cramping up on the bike ride or the run. And usually it has something to do with the nutrition plan not going as well as you expected. What was really great about this race is that the swim portion, which, as I mentioned, I was most worried about. The swim portion was in the Columbia River, and it was a point to point swim. And so you're swimming downriver with the current. And, throughout my 10 months of training, I, started in the pool, and then switching from swimming in the pool to open water swimming is a whole nother concept that you have to conquer, because there's waves splashing. You're not just following the lane that you're in. You have to look up, check to make sure you're completely not off course somewhere. So the group that I swam with throughout the summertime is called River Huggers, and I probably have mentioned them on the podcast previously, but we swim here in Portland, and River Huggers is organized by Human Access Project, so they're promoting the health of the Willamette. And that has been a lifesaver to learn to open water swim, because not only are you in a group of people who are also doing it with you, but they also have safety kayakers who are looking out for boats and other stuff that's happening in the water, making sure that you're safe. So that has been another great outlet to get me to this point. But, after having all that experience swimming in the Willamette, and in those swims, you're swimming both with and against the current. This was like a breeze. I was so nervous about this, but the current was so helpful. I felt like I was just flying down the river, and I blinked my eyes and I was already getting out. So that was the best part. I think of the whole race, I was most nervous for the swim, but it ended up being my most favorite aspect.
So what then was that race day experience like? So you start with the swim. Does that start in the city itself in Richland?
Yes. So that starts in Richland. What's great about Richland is that they have a ton of parks just along the river. And on race day, you arrive to this big area called the transition area. And that's where you put your bike, and that your extra nutrition goes there, all your gear that you'll need. And that's like your home base, right? Where you're changing from one sport to the next. You run back to your little spot, change, and then keep it going. And so you set that up. It's like dark outside. It's first thing in the morning. You're getting there around 5 a.m., setting that up. And then you walk from that transition spot up to where the swim starts. So you walk first thing in the morning about 1.2 miles. And then from there, it's like the whole group of people is there, and you organize into what you think your estimated swim time will be. And so everyone who's fast elite triathletes is right at the front, and they're jumping into the water first and swimming down, I'm sure even much faster than my time. And they have like a band playing there. There's all your cheerleaders, your fans, your family are right there at the swim start. And you get into the water, swim back down to that transition area. As you're getting out of the water, you're taking your wetsuit off, and they have volunteers who will help take the wetsuit off of you. You're like sitting in the grass as they rip it off. Underneath of your wetsuit, you're usually wearing a tri-suit that has padding in it for the bike, and it's quick drying, which is really nice. You go over to your transition area, you put on your bike helmet, your shoes, grab your bike, and you're on your way. There are some triathletes who have mastered this. They have their shoes already clipped into their bike, and they are running full speed, jumping onto their bike, somehow slipping their feet into the shoes to shave seconds off of their final time. I was not that person. I took about 5 minutes, reapplied sunscreen, made sure I had everything. This is my first time. I didn't need to be shaving off seconds off of my final time. And then from there, you exit out. You're on that 56-mile bike ride route. What was awesome was that I didn't know what to expect with this race, but it was completely closed to cars. So you felt really safe. And what was also great is that I felt like the whole city kind of came together. There were so many spectators on the bike route, and some of the most hilly areas where you're like, when is this hill going to end? There were so many spectators cheering you on, and the energy was really great out there. So I felt like every single part of the bike, there were people encouraging you, which was awesome because you're out there for a while. About I think my bike time was 3 hours and 15 minutes, which is, yeah, a lot. And then after that, you return back to that same transition area. You put on all of your running gear, and then there was a really pretty running route along a riverside path. That same type of area that we were just swimming in, you're running on a path next to it. And there were some houses that backed up to that running path, and people were out with their hoses, like saying, "Give me a thumbs up if you want to be sprayed down." And I was like, "Please spray me down."
That's the best. I love it when people do that because you
Yeah,
need it.
you do.
Really need it.
And throughout the running route and the bike route, they had multiple stops where you could get extra fuel, water, electrolytes, and they had bathrooms if you need to use the bathroom, which is something that people often are like, what do you do in this situation? You either use the bathroom or you go in your tri-suit. But the run was really beautiful. I got a few calf cramps throughout that period, but still made it over the finish line. As you're approaching the finish line, they have this great red carpet with the IRONMAN logo. There's a ton of people cheering. They'll call out your name and say where you're from. And you cross that finish line, you get your medal. You are just on a serotonin high. Even if you can't feel your legs, it is the most incredible feeling. Also, what's really cool is that the medal that you get is very personalized to the race that you are running. And so this one had a whole wine theme to it. And it had like the medal had a picture of like vineyards on it. And then dangling off of the medal, they had, I don't know if there's a term for this, but the little wine glass identifiers that you put on the stem.
The charms.
Yes, the charms. It has three
charms.
different charms on it. So yeah, it was super cute.
That's awesome. Do they do like an after party event? Most running races do, but most running races are also not 6 hours long. So
there was no official event. They have a tent with like athlete food where you can go, and I feel like I had to wait 15 minutes to stand in line for some chicken fajitas. But I think everyone just goes and does their own thing. And, some of the elite triathletes were finishing up after, less than 5 hours. And then people towards the end were finishing like closer to 8 hours, I think was the cutoff time. So there's a huge span of people finishing this race.
So after having this experience, you seem very enthusiastic about it. Are you going to do this again? And if so, are you going to do the same race? Do you want to explore? What are your future plans?
This is something that I'm still mulling over in my head. I think that having this race at the time period of, late September, it meant I had to give up most of my summer to train. And that was a little unfortunate. Am I eyeing the Salem race that happens a bit earlier? Yes, absolutely. I think I really enjoyed the level of fitness, and like I could see the way that I progressed. So that was something that was really cool to me. And although, like I said, the training took up so much time, the way that I was able to do different events like Hood to Coast, like the Columbia River Cross Channel Swim, or biking around Crater Lake, Ride the Rim event, those were really cool because you still get to participate in an awesome scenic event, and it goes ultimately to that training. So all in all, I think it's a maybe, leaning more on the side of yes. I would like to do the Oregon race, so we will see. But I would love to run and participate in some shorter distance triathlons as well. I don't think it has to be this like all or nothing long distance endurance craziness.
Well, it sounds like an amazing experience. And I know that there are shorter triathlons all around Oregon. So if people are interested in that, there are all sorts of different races that you can participate in. And you don't have to drive all the way to Eastern Washington, Central Washington necessarily to do them.
Exactly. And I think what I really like about looking at these different triathlons for next year or whenever I want to commit to another race, and I'm sure you feel similarly about run races, is that you can travel to like some really cool places or explore some new spots, and that is super appealing to me.
I almost always pick my races for sightseeing reasons.
Exactly. So some smaller ones that I was eyeing earlier in the season in June, Bend puts on their endurance festival, and there are a bunch of different distances you can participate in. Is it a lot colder? Yes, I had some friends that participated in the swim. They couldn't like feel their extremities for like half of the race, but that is a great option and obviously very beautiful. And then you could also do Hag Lake is another great option for shorter distance tries. That happens in July, and I know this year there is one happening at the end of uh, or maybe it already happened, but there was one at the end of September that was on the coast as well. So a ton of different options out there, and maybe you are listening and you want to participate in the in the next half Ironman that happens in Richland, Washington. They are doing the same race next year in 2025. Okay, Julie, hopefully I didn't just bore you as much as I have talked about this with my family and friends. I feel like their eyes start to glaze over a little bit, but maybe since you're, a bit of an endurance athlete
Yes.
yourself, you can kind of understand some of this
Oh
stuff.
no, I love stuff like this. Like even I will probably never do a triathlon because I am a terrible swimmer. But I love hearing about this stuff. I love people's enthusiasm about endurance events. Like I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to that sort of thing. Even if it's not something that I'm necessarily going to try and do myself, I love to hear about other people's experiences. I find it so fascinating.
Good. And yeah, I think, overall, it's not even, the race itself is great and to have that competition, but it's really kind of this sense of accomplishment and doing something just, for yourself, and seeing all of that time and energy come together for an event like this is at least why I did it. All right. Well, I think that will do it for today's episode. Until next time, you can watch our videos on the Oregonians YouTube channel and view all of our travel and outdoors coverage on OregonLive.com/travel, as well as hereisoregon.com. Please leave us a rating or review if you enjoy the show. And if you want to support this podcast as well as our local journalism, please consider a subscription to Oregon Live. You can find details at OregonLive.com/pod support. Also, if you're a fan of the show and you're interested in potentially sponsoring it, you can get in touch with our marketing people at advertise@Oregonian.com. This episode of the show was produced by me, Vickie Connor, alongside Julie Evenson. Stay safe and happy travels, everyone. Until next time, we leave you with this 10 seconds of Zen.